Today's video lecture is about Kuhn's article on remix as rhetoric or remix as argument. The preview for today's lecture, we're going to talk about remix as a digital argument that uses many modes, and we're going to bring in Ettinger and Campbell's positions on argument, rhetoric, claim, evidence, and warrant. All of those are still super important today. So make sure that you're thinking back to the first part of class, that you kind of pull your notes up for when we talked about what rhetoric is and when we talked about the components of a good argument with claim, evidence, and warrant. All of that is going to be relevant and super important today, so you can't just forget about it. So Kuhn argues that we need to use a rhetorical perspective instead of an art or film perspective when thinking about remix videos, and she gives us a couple reasons. First, she says we don't want to privilege the single author. And sometimes this happens in literature or film studies. It's a single genius author who has the vision for what the piece should look like at the end. But when you remix, she argues, you're not just recycling, you're doing something really big and important. And by not privileging the single author, we're not privileging big media versus citizen or fan. That remix is a legitimate act, and that it takes hard work, and that it should be valued in that sense. Secondly, she tells us that we don't need to separate literature from argument. Indeed, literature can make an argument. Video can make an argument. Songs can make an argument. And using a rhetorical perspective allows us to recognize that. Third, she says we don't need to reinforce the divide between artist, professional, and amateur. When we use an art or a film perspective to analyze remix videos, we reinforce that divide, and we say that the artists and the professionals are better than the amateurs. But when we use a rhetorical perspective, we argue that anyone can create stuff that makes sense and is relevant and is important in their daily lives and maybe gets wider circulation. Ultimately, she gives us the fourth argument about why we should use a rhetorical perspective, and this is the biggest argument. She says it's because remix makes arguments. Remix matters, and that it inserts itself into that social world. So let's pause here and review what a rhetorical perspective is. Hopefully we've been thinking about this all semester, but we can review this in a really explicit way right now. Remember that rhetoric asks three main questions. What is that piece of rhetoric? What is that rhetorical artifact doing? What argument is it making? And how is it making that argument? And with what implications for how we communicate other communities and the discourses that we use every day? So if we think of argument not as polemical, not as two people arguing against each other, but if we think of argument as a claim for which evidence is provided, and it can retain that dialogic or conversational nature, but if we think of argument that way, a rhetorical perspective really makes sense for our remix videos. Remember that the creator is the one who makes an argument. The creator puts together the rhetorical artifact, and the rhetorical critic then does the analysis, asks how is that argument made. So ultimately, we're going to assume that remix makes an argument. So Kuhn gives us a definition of remix. She says that it's a digital utterance expressed across the registers of the verbal, the oral, and the visual. When she uses the word utterance, she wants us to see remix as something that you're saying in the real social world. And that's all that utterance means here. You can think of it as speaking, you can think of it as writing, but it's just you putting something out there. So when we think of the other part of that definition, using multiple modes across multiple registers, she uses the word register, but we're going to use the word mode. We need to take a moment to define mode. Writing scholar Gunther Kress defines modes as, quote, culturally and socially produced resources for representation, end quote. So that means modes are things like image, like text, speech, and sound. In your persuasive speeches, you used multiple modes of communication. You used an oral mode. What you said, it was verbal. You used a mode of images on your slides, right? You used a video mode, perhaps you included a clip on your slides, and you might have used sound as a mode in your persuasive speeches. You might have used it along with a video, you might have played a song or used a sound effect. In your remixes, you'll be using some of the same modes, but not all modes will be available to you in the same way. So oral mode, here you're not speaking as much as you did in your speech, but you still might speak into the camera. You might use an image mode, you might still use still images in your video, but probably not as much. You're probably going to use more of the mode of video, likely using mostly clips when you're creating your remix video. And you might also include sound as a mode, whether that's oral voiceover, whether that's songs or sound effects. That's certainly an option in your remix videos. In the next slide, I want to take a look at an example that illustrates the difference between these modes. Modes aren't necessarily better than another kind of mode. Text isn't better than video, verbal isn't better than image, but modes do allow you to do particular things, and you have to make those choices on your own. So we're going to take a look at an example that illustrates the difference between those modes and illustrates the different ways you have to make argument using different modes. So it's a clip from, I have two things, an article from the San Francisco Chronicle newspaper on Bat-Kid, and then I have a video on Bat-Kid that the San Francisco Chronicle newspaper also put out. So I'm going to play the video first, then I want you to take a break, read the really brief newspaper article, and then we're going to think about how they make the same points, both the newspaper article and the video, how they make the same points, but how they might do that in different ways. And are some points harder to make using particular modes? But first, let's watch the video.
Miles is brave not because he's going to be a superhero. He's brave because he's battled a very adult battle, beginning not even 2 years of age and battling leukemia. They're robbed of their childhood for 3 years. We hope to restore some of that, turning San Francisco into Gotham City and help Miles have a little bit of his childhood back.
Gotham City needs you, Batman. This is Police Chief Greg, sir, only hoping you can hear my voice. It's critical that you call me right now. We have a damsel in distress. But that's just the beginning, Batman. Just the tip of the iceberg. You have to call me. It's urgent. Please, Cape Crusader, we need you. And bring the Bat-Kid.
I don't even know, after 15 years, that I can appropriately articulate what that power of a wish is like. But you know it when you see it. The attention on Miles and this wish, what San Francisco is doing, is incredible. Part of the process of what Make-A-Wish does in planning a wish is giving the child something to look forward to. So during Miles' darkest moments of chemotherapy and being sick and hospital stays, this was a distraction for him to start thinking about when he was going to be Batman. It got picked up by a blogger and it just went viral. And as a result, the wish has taken on a life of its own. I don't know what scale a 5-year-old thinks of a lot of people. And he comes from a town of 1,000. I know when it works when I look at the parent's face and I look at the joy that they receive. He's in remission. He just finished up his last chemotherapy. It's one of the reasons the family asked to do the wish now, so he would have energy. Superheroes need a lot of it. I think this wish just really struck a chord with people. A lot of people remember from their childhood wanting to be a superhero, and here he is battling leukemia. And as far as I'm concerned, every child with a life-threatening medical condition is a superhero to me.
So the link to the newspaper article is posted on Learn at UW in the news section. So I want you to take a minute, pause the video, go read that article. It's really short. Otherwise, the rest of this lecture won't make sense. So please pause and go do that. Hopefully now you've read the newspaper article, you paused the video, we're back. I want to talk about the difference between those two pieces, the article using text and the video using sound, video, and images, and what those modes do to create different rhetorical artifacts that are essentially making the same argument and making the same point. So first, I have a couple points here that I want to draw attention to. First, I want to talk about the crowd. So the text gives us exact numbers. Here's what the text says. Quote, the Make-A-Wish Foundation has often arranged elaborate gifts for kids with life-threatening diseases, but never at this scale, said Patricia Wilson, the foundation's Bay Area head. Wilson had originally hoped a few hundred volunteers would support Miles, who lives in Tula Lake and is in remission from leukemia, but more than 12,000 signed up. So here the text gives us those exact numbers. We know how many volunteers signed up. We know precisely how big the crowd was. But in the video, we saw the crowd for ourselves. We saw the bodies of actual people, which created a different kind of effect. We saw the proof of how big it was. And we made that determination ourselves. We could look at the crowd and say, wow, that's a lot of people. But the drawback there is that it's not precise. We don't know from the video how many exact people showed up. Second place where we see the difference between the textual and the visual mode is when the text talks about the Make-A-Wish Foundation and renewing the lost part of a kid's childhood. The text says, quote, Wilson, the Make-A-Wish Foundation official, said Miles, who was 20 months old when he was diagnosed with acute leukemia, was one of many children who lost parts of their childhood to a grown-up battle. End quote. So here in the text, Wilson's testimony functions as evidence. She's an expert in this area, and therefore we should believe her. In the video, we start to see a little more proof of how much this wish meant to Miles, and we see how much renewing that part of his childhood really actually matters. In the video, we see Miles's face, and it becomes difficult to say that we shouldn't support this little kid. He is just so smiley and excited that you have to think this is a good thing for him. Getting to be Bat Kid is important for him. So this part of the video adds some evidence to Wilson's claim that he deserves to have some kind of his childhood back. The third place where we see a key difference between the text mode and a video and sound mode is when we talk about the supporters supporting Bat Kid along the sidelines. In the text, we get this, quote, Elisa Height, 37, and Amy Jackson, 32, had tears in their eyes. They had worked with TripIt, a travel website and Make-A-Wish partner, to plan a flash mob dance in Union Square to Journey's Don't Stop Believin'. They said Miles's enthusiasm was contagious. We were here to cheer on Miles, but Miles also helped us, Height said, end quote. So the text points to Elisa, or Elisa, I'm not sure how you pronounce her name, and Amy as two specific people who are cheering Miles on. And we get their quote, and we know that they had tears in their eyes. But in the video, we see even more proof of lots of people cheering him on. It's not just two people, but we see lots of people. And we see the actual tears on someone's face. So we see proof that someone's not just claiming they were teary-eyed, but they actually cried. We see that it's more than just two people who are enthusiastic. We see lots of signs, lots of crying faces, lots of enthusiasm cheering Miles on. And these people aren't just watching the event as spectators. They look generally excited for Miles. And so the video gives us a different kind of proof than what a quote can in the text. So clearly the modes that you use to make your particular argument, to make your point, matter. And you as the creator have to make choices between those modes. What mode best conveys your point? What mode best conveys your evidence? And how do you combine those modes together? Remember that you will also use rhetorical strategies. Will you use a montage? Will you use a collage? Will you refer to a famous YouTuber for credibility? What strategies will you use for evidence, etc.? Audience is important when you're choosing your claim, evidence, and warrant structures. It's just as important in your video as it was for your speech and for your online communication journal entries. So let's take a look at what this means for your particular assignment and how this gets played out on the rubric. So there are two parts of the rubric where this is relevant. The first part is the section called quality of argument. So here the rubric says you clearly presented the problem, who it affects, and why it's significant. You clearly presented the solution, why it's effective, and specific steps to implement it. So for both of those, you're going to need really clear claim, evidence, and warrant combinations. And so this is where you get to think about the quality of your argument. The question is, did you have each part? And did you cover all of those topics? The question here isn't, did you make the right argument? The question is, did you make a full argument, a convincing argument, by having every piece of the puzzle in place? Did you make your argument convincing by providing a claim, evidence, and warrant every place that you needed it? If you had trouble with this in your paper, definitely plan to spend extra time on them, the claim, evidence, warrant combinations when you're working on your video, because they're even less straightforward in video than they are in typed text. So you can do this a couple ways. I have a couple specific suggestions for ways to make sure that you have those claims, evidence, and warrants within your video. So first, as you're planning your video, make an outline of your argument. This is separate from any kind of storyboard you might do. Think of this like the exercise we did in class when we talked about Macintosh's article and the remix videos we watched. Each video made an argument, some kind of overarching claim. Then that claim was backed up by subclaims, evidence, and warrants. If you can't list your subclaims, evidence, and warrant, your audience definitely can't. And that means the grader can't. And today's attendance question will help you practice this. The second suggestion I have is meet with me during office hours or make an appointment. We can totally work together to create the outline of your argument and identify any holes you might have. Then the third suggestion I have is meet with the design lab consultants about it. And if you need more than one session, feel free to make more than one appointment. See if they can figure out what your argument is and brainstorm ways to make that clearer for your audience. The second part of the rubric where we see this, what we've talked about today, is in the modes section. Effectively used the affordances of video. So here the rubric asks you to use found footage as evidence, that your sound and music enhanced the argument, that your text and images enhanced the argument, that you made deliberate choices between modes. You didn't accidentally use one mode to make one part of your argument and not another, that you made the best choice for which mode to convey which part of your argument. Identifying how other videos use found footage as evidence can help you do the same thing in your video. And Design Lab is really good at helping you with this too. Your readings from Lessig and today's Kuhn article should also inform your work on this part of the rubric. They show you lots of examples of other videos who used found footage as evidence, and they tell you how that works in relation to the bigger argument. So if you skip one of the readings, the rubric will be difficult to understand and it will be even harder to make your video. So I just want to use this as another call to make sure that you do all the readings and you listen to both of the video lectures. Otherwise, the rubric won't make sense, the assignment sheet won't make sense, and making the video will be really hard and frustrating, and your feedback afterwards will be even more frustrating. But if you have done all of the readings and you have watched all of the video lectures and you have done all of your attendance posts, I think it'll be really great and easy. So let me transition to your attendance post then. This is meant as a way to help move you in the direction toward using those multiple modes to make your argument. So your attendance post is, find a video online that makes an argument. And this has to be a video that hasn't been included in any of the articles we've read or talked about before in class. Your goal in this post is to identify one set of claim, evidence, and warrant, so one combination of those three used by the video. It's likely that there's more than one claim. Videos often have subclaims with pieces of evidence and even multiple pieces of evidence, but choose one claim to focus on for this attendance post. Step 1 is being able to figure out the claim, evidence, and warrant structure for other videos, to analyze someone else's video, Step 2 is being able to do this in your own videos, and that's what the assignment requires. So think of step 1 as a way to make step 2, your own video, even easier. And indeed, it's hard, but that's why we're working up to it. So try out that attendance post. Let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to email me or make an appointment for a Skype kind of office hours appointment while I'm traveling. But otherwise, I look forward to seeing you all when I get back. Thanks.